I'll buy the drinks for next time.
Next time, invite me.
That'd be good. Yeah.
We'll call this meeting to order, the special meeting of council at 6:01 p.m. Any declaration of interest or general nature of thereof, please state it now. Seeing none, we'll move on with the agenda items. And number 3 on the agenda, staff reports, planning report number PL-032-20, Township Broadband Business Plan. We'll put a motion on the floor, moved by Councillor Oki, seconded by Councillor Burrell, that council direct staff to proceed with an RFQ for the preparation of a business plan for the operation of the Township Broadband Network. The plan is to examine corporate structure models, anticipated maintenance and operating costs of the system, and break-even points, and that council authorize a budget of up to $25,000 from the Modernization Reserve Fund for said business plan. Discussion on this motion. Questions, queries, concerns? Councillor Maybe.
Thank you, Your Worship, through you. I do have a couple questions, and I know that it is listed here that it's Telecom Inc. One of my questions is how connected to Bell Canada are they? Are they a company? Just another question. And is there ability to go with a different provider? Because I know that there has been some information given that we may go one way or another. And is there another company service perhaps? And because we're doing a study, part of my questions there are the pole agreement, because poles cost you so much per year. So if we have 10,000 poles, we got to go at $40 a year. You know, it's a substantial amount. So in saying that, I'm also wondering how much in-ground conduit is being considered in this study. Of course, in-ground conduit of our own is our own. There is no rental cost on that. And probably, I hazard a guess that half of the township could be a buried service, so that then we don't have to pull down, and then City's Bay and Lingers, there is a lot of tillable land. Side of the road would be adequate for conduit. And then the other suggestion would be also why rent poles if we put our own in and maintain them ourselves and then get rental from them, possibly from other providers. So again, this is all stuff that, and I realize that maybe we're early in this stage, but in my line of business, if you don't ask the questions early enough, you've been forgotten or not part of the program. And I provincially get a little bit bent out of shape because it happens way too often. If we're not looking after our dollars at this point, the end of it may be totally different. And then one other question there is the actual multi-mode equipment instead of a single mode, which fiber optic can be. Multi-mode has a lot more capability. So these are things that I would like to see considered during this RFP, I guess. Thank you.
Ms. Ndidi, do you want to speak to this, or CEO, if you'd like to come to the podium so everybody can hear you on mic? Thank you.
Thank you, Your Worship, through you. I can confirm that Telecom is its own entity. It is not controlled by Bell. It has a very good working relationship with Bell because Telecom is recognized as one of the leaders in fiber deployment. Their trucks are all over the place, not just down here along the Parkway, but in pretty much every major center you'll see Telecom. So no, they are independent, although they have a very good working relationship with Bell. Okay, polls, and excuse me, I was trying to keep track of your questions, but I may have missed something. Part of the work that we'll need to do is a poll survey to see the conditions, the rents, all that sort of thing. That is also something that we are looking at as part of the procurement for business, for developing business plan to really get our head around what kind of costs can we anticipate and where's the break-even point on all of this. We are considering both pole and buried construction. However, as soon as you start tunneling, it gets very expensive, especially where there's a lot of rock, which our township is blessed with or cursed with, depending on your view. So yes, we're aware of the pole situation. We're aware of the challenges with underground construction as well. I'll have to get back to you on the multi-node versus single-purpose equipment. Telecom was recommending a certain equipment configuration based on their experience, and but it's an interesting point that you raise on the multi-node. I'll understand, or multi-mode. I'll get back to you on that one. And then I kind of lost the thread. So.
Thank you, and follow up on that, the access to the poles, because the other thing with the agreements with poles is that you get to use them to install, but then nowadays you have to have an agreement or ask for permission to go back up the pole to do repairs or replace or.
That's quite right, and a lot of it has to do with whether the pole is fully utilized or whether or not you can add services to it. The thing with, I think the hydro poles are, if we do Hydro One poles versus Bell telephone poles, the moment you touch a pole, you have to bring it up to current standards. And so there can be quite an expense associated with that. So that's why the need for a pole survey as part of all of this would be critical, as well as the rents for it and how much we charge for this on a monthly basis. If we are doing 10,000 poles at whatever amount, we have to factor that into our costs on top of our operation and our maintenance costs to see what's reasonable for a back-end price that can be charged to consumers. So that's what we're trying to get at here. Is this economically feasible? Now that we have an idea of what would be involved in a network, the actual amount of fiber we need, and the homes that we can reach, all that sort of stuff. We had to do that legwork first in order to now go and intelligently say, okay, if it's a mile or a kilometer of fiber on a pole, that's going to encapsulate 100 poles or what have you. And then we can work on the cost of all of that. So that's where we're going with all of this. I don't think it's feasible for us to be creating our own pole network at this point. I think the cost would prove prohibitive, just on top of all the construction costs to be putting poles and getting the rights of way that we would need, even if we can put to a certain extent on township roadway allowances. I still think there'd be some challenges on that one, and that's a whole other dynamic that may just show it's an expensive proposition.
And having said that, excuse me, through your worship, will the study actually outline that? Because again, it should be something that is actually a consideration. Because I don't see it just being, okay, we can't do it, and if we're going to pay these people to do this true consultation for us, I would hope that that's actually a line item that they're actually saying yes or no, or what the do's and don'ts, or if it's feasible, you know.
And through your worship, that's what we're hoping as well, is that we can at least get an idea of, if not what the cost per pole is going to be and what the amount of work needs to be done on each pole and how many poles we will use in the first place and how much digging we'll have to do. We're hoping to get an idea of how much is it going to cost to operate and maintain over and above the construction costs. We have a very rough estimate from Telecom, or not a rough estimate, but based on their design, what it will cost. But also we want to see, if we build it, does it make, for the size of township that we have, is it something that can be offered, a service that can be offered to our residents at an attractive, affordable price? And what kind of uptake will we get from people if we can roll it out at a certain price, or if we have to charge another price, are we going to get more people or less people, and that's where we need to go with this. I think it's a crucial piece of the puzzle, because it would be a shame to go through all of this, lay all this fiber down and not have enough uptake at an economically viable price to light up the fiber and get actual usage for the network.
Yes, no, I understand that, sir. And part of it is also, if we own the pole opposed to renting the pole, for how many years we have to rent it? What's the cost of the pole opposed to renting the pole for the same duration of time? Where's our break even? Where does the pole become more advantageous for us to own opposed to renting it? And that's part of the questioning that I'm actually, perhaps asking here also.
Well, at some point you would go through your worship. At some point there would be a break-even point. You would think. However, whether or not we can even do that as a broadband network, and what the provincial approvals would be required, and all the safety issues and all that sort of thing, on top of finding the land to do that, because I'm pretty sure they won't let us double along where an existing pole line is, and there may be some aesthetic concerns, as well as having poles on two sides of a road and what have you. So it's certainly worth further consideration, and that's what we'll do.
Yeah, thank you for that. Just see if there's anything else that we did. The companies themselves, if we put all this in and find that Bell Canada isn't the provider, is there going to be much trouble with going with another provider if Bell Canada isn't in our midst?
Through you, your worship, what we're trying to do is have a generic network that we can hook up to a pipeline, whether it's a Bell pipeline or a Rogers or whoever. We're kind of generic as far as who we'd like to use. Obviously, we try to get the best deal to make it economic sense, but there are options for that.
Okay, thank you.
Any further questions for the CAO or the planner in regards to the RFQ in front of us this evening? Seeing none, I will call the question. All those in favor of the motion at hand, please signify. All those opposed, and it carries. Thank you. Next on the agenda is bylaws.
No.
Oh,
I just don't.
I apologize. So actually, next on the agenda is our training with Kate Tyndall, our treasurer. We'll be reviewing asset management, and this will be a great refresher going into budget season. So thank you very much. Go ahead, Kate.
Good evening, through your worship. So I have a slideshow I'm just going to run through quickly. Some of it might be some repeat information from some we've shared previously, but hopefully it's a good refresher, and also trying to just give a bit more comprehensive overview of where we're at with asset management currently and what we're looking at probably over the next 1 to 3 years.
Is it on?
Technical difficulties, we'll have to maybe, oh, there we go.
Just let me know.
This is just a high-level agenda. There's about 4 different kind of areas we're going to touch on tonight. We're talking about what asset management is, what we've actually done here in the township with asset management over the last several years, high-level overview, and then looking at what the next steps are. Sorry, some of the slides are a little wonky. The formatting kind of didn't exactly copy over well into some of these slides, but so what is asset management? Well, for a municipality, when we're looking at providing services to residents, what asset management really comes down to is what those services are, what level of service is to be provided, and what assets we need so that we can provide those services. So we're looking at how we manage those assets basically in the most sustainable and efficient manner over the life of the asset so that we can provide those services directed by council and corporate objectives. Again, some other definitions and kind of explanations of what we're trying to do with asset management. It's really about looking at the full life cycle costing of assets. So being able to look at everything from purchase price right through to disposal, and making sure we capture all those costs so that when we're comparing different purchases, acquisitions, operating maintenance costs, we're actually comparing them over the life of the asset. What is the best value for our township tax dollars when we're looking at how we manage those assets to provide the services that are required. It's also about trying to provide a line of sight, align what we're doing at the front line level of staff going out, repairing roads, providing waste services, plowing roads, how that aligns up with what the services are, the corporate objectives, and how we manage our assets in a way that ensures that those objectives are met and they translate right down into work plans and day-to-day activities. Again, just kind of different depiction of the same information that we're talking about. So we're trying to gather all this data right now. I've been working over the last few months with the software provider that we went with citywide and trying to gather our data into a database. So it's trying to get that data and provide it in a meaningful way so it's relevant for evidence-based decisions. So actually having a framework, detailed information, data that we can use to make decisions when we're talking about budgeting, when we're talking about decisions of capital or operating nature. And so really the goal is to be sustainable. And when we're talking sustainability, we're really looking not just like at a 4-year period, we're looking over the life of our assets. So starting to look 40, 50, 60 years down the road at how much money we're going to need to maintain those levels of service and have those assets that we need to be functioning properly. So asset management is really a way of doing business. It affects the entire organization. It's not just taking the plan, updating it for the new requirements that are actually regulated. I mean, we have to do these requirements, provide this plan so we can actually get funding. That's one of the requirements. But what we're really trying to do with asset management in the township here is change the way we do business. We're trying to change the culture and the way we make decisions. We're trying to implement basically a different way of looking at how we do decision making and how we present that information to council and the public so that there's a better understanding, more transparency in types of decisions that are being made and how they all link into the levels of service at a high level. So it's not just a plan, it involves a lot of different aspects of the business, and it takes the staff really in council's direction and buy-in and leadership to move this forward. So when we're looking at the plan, and again, sorry to kind of messed up the formatting a little bit here, but so council is really trying here is to provide some strategic direction through strategic plan, corporate objectives, whatever kind of avenue that might be, defining levels of service. And so through the level of service, again, we need certain assets. Whether they're the roads, waste sites, buildings, facilities, parks, whatever that might be. And as we determine what those assets are, that builds our operating and capital budgets and the resources that we need to make those things happen. Staff, we're really trying at the senior management team to work as a group, foster this change in how we look at decision making and how we're going to prepare budgets, how we're going to prepare information for council. It should allow us to streamline and automate a lot of business processes that might currently be done manually or on paper-based systems. And so that really the end goal is it should be better communication. We'll have a lot more data into a central repository, into a central software system that all staff can access. And it will enhance communication between different departments as we work together to try and make sure that the assets are being maintained in a sustainable manner to provide the services that are required. So for the residents, really trying to mitigate risk, which asset management and mitigating risk go hand in hand, because that's really what we're trying to do. Providing value for money and looking at long-term planning so that we can be sustainable. Just a couple slides on the township history, just to touch on. This isn't new. These things that we're talking about today have been covered in the previous asset management plan and also in another document that was prepared by a consultant. The 2014 asset management plan outlined a lot of the similar things that we're talking about with the asset management plan we're preparing now. So optimizing use of existing assets, undertaking regular assessment of our assets, looking at multi-year planning. So when we looked at that asset management plan, there was an infrastructure deficit of 7.5 million. I think probably every municipality in Ontario has an infrastructure deficit. It looks at what we need for funding, how much money do we need to fund these assets. And there's a deficit, meaning we don't have the money to fund everything that needs to be done for the assets that are inventoried in the plan. That's certainly not unusual. What we want to do is update that plan now into 2020 and understand what our deficit looks like, and then start planning for strategies around how to deal with the deficit. And that would be increasing our investment in different modes of funding, like whether we end up borrowing money, obviously funding opportunities that we can apply for, different strategies to try to mitigate that deficit that we do face. This report, the replacement value of the assets of the township was about 64 million. When I look at our replacement value today, which is based on very rough draft data that I've put together so far in the asset management database, we're at 105 million replacement value today. So obviously we are growing very quickly and there's a lot of money involved, and so it's important for us to manage that information, that data, and plan efficiently for the future. So we also had an asset management municipal action plan prepared. It was through a program called AMP It Up. With this document was put together, which basically outlined a lot of the same suggestions, recommendations as the asset management plan. So looking at defining levels of service, implementing a condition rating system and moving away from system based on useful life. So basically at the base level, all of our assets that we capture in our asset management database, if we don't have other meaningful data, we basically amortize them over the life of the asset. So if we buy a vehicle, it's 10 years old, it has a useful life of 10 years, we would basically say that each year it's using up 1 year of useful life, it has 9 yet left, and that would determine the condition that the vehicle's in and when we need to replace it. So better data, when what we're trying to build is a system that it would actually look at, well, how many kilometers has that vehicle been driven? How much have we put into maintenance? How many hours is it used depending on the type of equipment? Using different types of information and actually maybe physical inspection of vehicles, physical inspections of facilities to actually gauge that condition in a more meaningful way so we can better estimate when it needs to be replaced and be able to fund it. So taking a risk-based approach to asset management, as we talked about, those go hand in hand. And sorry, I guess.
No, maybe I'm ahead of you.
And so for the asset management system, again, when we're talking about asset management, it really is more than just a plan. It's more than just one document. It involves policy, strategy, framework, and governance over the entire way of doing business. So, all right, I'm on page 12. That
There you go. Sorry.
Is it working better for you? Do you want it?
No, I can actually do it here on the screen, but
That's great, thank you. So the next slide is just talking a little bit about leadership. And so again, we're looking at engaging staff. It's really important that we get buy-in. We want to make sure that there's strong leadership and that we can build collaboration and break down silos in departments, because this is really about trying to come together as an organization so that we work together. We get the best information we can to make the best decisions. Another slide kind of on that alignment and that line of sight. So really trying to make sure everybody from your frontline worker to your department head understands why we're doing what we're doing. So taking the corporate objectives or our strategic plan, understanding how that relates to our asset management policy and plan, right down to what we're doing in daily activities. So what maintenance, preventative maintenance, operating activities. It can be work orders and service requests that are set up at a very detailed low level that will tie into our assets, and we can actually build that information to tie everything that happens to a particular asset through the system that we're implementing right now. So So as we just talked about, the corporate objective strategic plan, we do have a strategic plan, however, I think we are looking at updating that. The asset management policy was adopted by council last year, I think, or the year before, when Nigel was treasurer, he brought that forward. So then there's a couple other documents that we are working on. The asset management plan dated 2014 will be updating for the regulatory requirements we have next year. And then the operational maintenance activities, I mean, those are things we have. They may be informal, they may be not very defined or documented, but those are things where as we move forward and try to streamline processes, we try to capture some of that data in a more efficient manner so we can use it to leverage to make better decisions going forward. So that's supposed to say check, plan, do, act. So just that continuous improvement, asset management will never be done. We will be doing asset management for the rest of our life because the assets will change, the requirements will change, technology will change, and we will be continually updating and trying to do better with what we have. So and constantly planning for the future and making sure we're sustainable. Again, trying to map through what the day-to-day activities that we're doing, tie into our work plans and our budgets, and they should tie right into the strategic objectives of the township. So when it comes to decision making, again, really wanting to get to a point where we're making decisions when it comes to the budgets based on actual information, data that we can pull into the system, have a framework for understanding what risk is across the organization from different assets, different departments. And it's really a balancing act because obviously the level of service we want to provide is always going to increase, but we're trying to manage our costs while managing risk as well. So it's a balancing act of how we deal with those three factors. And that is really at council's direction through budgeting process and strategic objective setting. Another slide to try to show kind of all the pieces that touch asset management and how it is so integral to everything we do. You know, as we start to build our asset data, it affects data management. Who owns the data? How do we gather the data? How do we make sure the data is relevant? How do we make sure it's timely and accurate to use it? The budget sustainability, growth, we need to start looking at planning for the future. Well, is there growth that's going to impact what our requirements are for capital in future years? All these things will come into play. So for next steps, as I mentioned, we have started implementing the software that we purchased. So we're working on the database of asset inventory information right now. And then condition, risk, levels of service, these are some of the other things we're going to be working on. And I actually have another handout I'm just going to pass around as well, just to elaborate a little bit more on basically on that slide. But if there's any questions at this point, I'm very happy to answer them as well.
Councillor Opie, I recognize you.
Thank you, Your Worship, and to you. Okay, I have two questions. The first question is, you spoke of a cultural change. From where you stand right now, how you understand our staff here, on a scale of 1 to 10, 1 being least, 10 being the greatest, how do you perceive the challenge to get staff to comply, develop and train along those lines?
Through your worship, I'm not sure I can put an actual number on the, like in the entire organization right now, because really so far I'm only involved senior management. And actually my plan is, depending on how the presentation goes tonight and the feedback I receive from council, is to roll this presentation out to staff. So building the asset management module and the data right now has mainly been me. I haven't, other than asking people questions, I haven't showed a lot of people the system yet. But what I hope to do is start to talk about asset management like I am tonight and get staff at least thinking about what it is, hopefully get them interested in it, and then start to have more conversations and involve them a lot more once we start implementing the next module of the citywide product, which is going to involve everybody. And we have great buy-in right now from senior management. I would say like everybody's very supportive, and the CEO is very supportive, so that's very helpful for me.
My next question would be, having seen a very hierarchical structure go from a linear decision-making model, which is lifestyle, to what is actually a variegated module type of decision making. Because you're working at different levels for the same goal, and sometimes it's hard to get by. It's doable, but it takes time.
Yeah, through your worship. So, yeah, and it's interesting because a lot of the work that I'm looking at now and trying to develop the setup in the software program helps build in some of that stuff. But again, like if I'm looking at roads and I'm setting up an asset profile, it's called, so I'm looking at, they all have basically the same useful life, the same risk factors and so on. Right now, we don't even have a director of operations, but like what I really need then is to sit down with like a director of operations or a supervisor who looks after roads and say, you know, what are the factors that you see as the biggest consequence of failure should a road actually fail? And how do we measure that? And then we look at all these things for that one group of assets, but then do it for each group of assets in a way that's systematic across the organization so we can actually try to make decisions without having bias, basically, right? So it's going to be an interesting exercise, and like I said, the thing with it is, you know, you tackle a couple of areas maybe, and then you just kind of keep building on it. Once we get a better understanding too, then we'll be able to roll that out hopefully in other departments.
Can I ask you to turn your microphone? Thank you. So are there any more questions for the treasurer? Councillor Jameson.
Looking at two slides, and I appreciate I asked a couple of questions online and they were well answered here. Slide 18, the optimized decision making. Desired levels of service, affordable costs. Your worship, when the treasurer talks about culture change, strikes me as this is a critical slide with respect to how a council behaves, with respect to managing the expectations of residents in the context of, you know, somebody wants you to buy a building somewhere and spend $1 million. And the asset management exercise tells you, you better not do that. Part of that culture change is to optimize what we already have and do the right thing. Whereas I'm reading this slide 18 as the push up in terms of the level of service people expect, or the level of expenditure, or I pay so much in the way of taxes, therefore I expect this, and this. And in many respects, I guess observing these slides and this exercise, it will be our job, in my view, your worship, to assist with the culture change among our residents. And I just want to make one other comment, if I may. On the strategic plan exercise that we last did, I found it that, because I worked with one of the community groups, I found it aspirational to the point of whimsical. And to the extent that we are going to get into a new strategic planning process, I'm hoping that it's more reflective of this mentality, which is much more stick to your knitting, much more one step ahead, let's figure out where we're at. And in the context of, you know, COVID and everything else, we don't have a lot of wiggle room to fulfill everyone's dreams. And I think we're going to learn this the farther we get into this exercise. So it's not really questions, it's just me banging on. Thank you, Your Worship.
Thank you, Councillor Jameson. Deputy Mayor.
Thank you, Your Worship, and through you to the treasurer. How does this roll out to public works side of things? You know, those are some of our major assets. Will this be a tracking system as far as how we do maintenance in the future as well?
Through your worship. Yeah, maybe we'll just go through this handout really quickly because it's going to talk a little bit about that, and then I can come back to that. Okay. Yeah, so the first page is just basically a summary of the regulation, just as a refresher. I think it's good for us to revisit this even as senior management to remind ourselves this is actually what we have to meet by next summer. Second page is actually from an MFOA presentation I watched this morning. I kind of copied their slides because I thought they summarized the regulation easier to read and understand, but those are some of the requirements. Page 3 is a very tentative timeline I just put together for trying to meet that regulation.
just not to stop you, but I just wanted to clarify on that list. I'm assuming that January 31st, 2021, not 2020.
Yeah, those
Going
are all wrong, sorry.
Well, it's an easy typo, but just for
Yes,
clarification.
you're correct, sorry about that.
We'll correct that before we put that up on the website. Thank you.
Sorry about that. And then when it comes to talking about the software, the citywide software, so I know it's hard to read the screenshots that are on there, and it wasn't really intended that you have to get into the real detail of what the screens actually look like, but just to try to give you an idea, that's the asset inventory module that the first screenshot is. So right now we have about 225 assets listed in there. But some of the stuff I'm working through right now is, for example, our road assets, the level of detail that the auditor captured in our accounting records was basically a lump sum item for each year. So we might have had, for example, $1 million of road additions in 2017. Well, now I'm trying to go back and I have found a lot of the records where I can actually break that down and say what road did we actually work on and the amounts. So a lot of that is just trying to clean that data up because we didn't really have a great system for tracking that stuff up until now. So we will end up with a lot more assets than 225. Then on the next page, there's a screenshot basically of one asset. When I click into one asset, and again, I apologize, I know it's hard to read, but the kind of the point of it is there is an almost endless amount of data that's being collected on our assets. There's one tab that's listed on the left, it's called attributes. I can set up attributes that we want to track of anything we can really think of. So like with vehicles, I'm tracking VIN numbers, tracking unit numbers that we use in the Public Works Department. You can track if we had warranties on the vehicles, we can track insurance, like pretty much whatever you can think of. And it obviously then it also tracks condition, risk, life cycle, amortization expense. And if anybody wants more detail, but again, I'm not expecting council needs to know this detail. It's just I want you to try to get a concept kind of it's very powerful. It's trying to leverage it in a way that we will be able to maintain it too, right? And keep up on that data. Otherwise, it's not going to be helpful.
Madam Treasurer, I'm gonna move again, don't move your head because you're blocking the sun, so I don't go blind looking at you. Thank you. I'll give an example of something that happened here the other day that council probably not aware of. One of our municipal trucks was out with one of the building officers, and a very large rock hit the windshield and like put a big smash in the windshield. So the windshield has to be replaced. So in your asset management system, that truck would be in there. That windshield replacement would be logged in there, and it would be part of the costing exercise, correct, and under the maintenance, and everything that's maintained on that vehicle would be in there, and the conditions, so we may hang on to that truck longer or shorter, depending on the maintenance records. Is that how I'm understanding this?
Right, and so maybe to kind of take it one step farther, if we had a resident call in and complain about a pothole or something on a road, we would create a service request, kind of what we're doing now with the system we currently have. It will get replaced with the system. From that service request, then we can take that and create a work order, and then we can assign a staff person to it, we can assign tasks to it, we can assign whatever, and we can assign it to an asset. So we can assign it to that segment of road, we can assign it to the sign, we can use, this is all like, by the way, like, this is the dream, but we can eventually hopefully attach it to GIS coordinates and actually put it on a map. It will attach to a specific asset, so a vehicle. We get the work done, we send it out, whatever that looks like, we attach that work order. Then we can look at, again, we're looking at vehicles, we look at the maintenance costs of that particular vehicle compared to other vehicles. Is that costing us a lot more? Why? Is it then maybe we need to go ahead and replace it after 10 years? Other vehicles, maybe the maintenance is low. We actually push the replacement to 15 years. Like, it's just trying to capture enough data to be able to actually make good decisions based on how much we've actually spent. So when we're looking at roads, again, right now we're just completing a roads needs study. So we have condition for all of our roads. So I now need to take that information and basically try to build it into the asset management plan. So if the condition of the road is actually better than we thought, then obviously it pushes the replacement data. Maybe we need to do, and I don't know, but like crack sealing or some of those rehabilitate, like maintenance type activities, those will actually get factored into the calculation of the condition, the rest of the replacement date of when it needs to replace. So everything that we do will get attached to a particular asset. It can get attached to this building, it can get attached to the HVAC system in this building to say it needs to be replaced where the roof needs to be replaced, different year. It's as much kind of as we can build into it.
Okay.
So can I come back to that?
Yeah, go ahead to Deputy Mayor and then I'll recognize Councilor Rowe.
So I don't have like a complete project plan really put together yet on the second module, which is the maintenance manager module, but as you're pointing out, like it's this, the big part of this module will be hopefully, you know, our workers in the field, they're driving down the road, they see a sign that's broken, they can hopefully eventually, again, the big dream is they have like a mobile, their phone, whatever, so they can go in, create a service request, attach it to that asset right then and say it's broken. Then, you know, the supervisor will probably create the work order, assign it to somebody, or if they fix it, whatever, like they will be frontline using this hopefully all the time. So yes, we will need to definitely spend a lot of time involving them to understand what their process is now, because we want to understand what they do now, how they capture, what data they do capture, how do we come up with processes that will work for them in the field going forward with the software, you know, training them with phones or whether it's iPads or whatever it looks like. Making sure they understand kind of the whole picture, because if they don't understand like, the end result of what we're trying to do, we won't really get buy-in, because the more data they give us, you know, way more helpful than me guessing at things I don't think.
Follow up.
Thank you, Your Worship. Through you, I've been 10 years or more trying to talk me into buying software which does that. There was a company that just specifically for public works, that when you punch something in on the road, it would make a work order according to minimum maintenance standards, until minimum maintenance standards. So if it was a pothole of a certain size or certain depth, you had X number of days to complete that task, or you were out of compliance. So is this sort of same type of idea?
Through your worship. So the software is really user-friendly and adaptable. So we can set up a lot of things in it that will help kind of manage those type of requirements. I haven't gotten into that part of the module yet that much. I haven't actually used that module myself. I did use the asset manager module previously, but from what I understand and from what I know of the software generally, we can set up pretty much anything. So because we can set up certain tasks. So if I'm envisioning you would pick a task that says like the pothole is X amount or whatever big, and it would automatically then say, well, these are the tasks you have to do, and this is the timeline. And so I think that it has enough logic in it. I know I've talked with other staff that are using this in other townships, you know, setting up playground inspection. So you can set up work orders that automatically will come up and you know, I'll get an email saying you need to go to this park today, you need to fill out these tasks, you need to say what condition, you know, you can kind of spell it all out, and it will, it's investing that time up front to make sure we understand what needs to be done and set it up so that it works. Because if it doesn't work for staff, then they just won't use it.
Does that answer your question? Excellent, thank you. Councilor Rowe.
Thank you, and to your worship. It's tough to formulate good questions because it's hard for me to wrap my head around the big concept, you know, we're fixing a pothole isn't easy. My concerns would be, so we move into a budgeting process. This should give us certain amounts of information that would inform that process, I guess. And so does it shape the way we use our reserves? Does it shape the way that we handle a One Jesse Street $12 million project? How carefully can you input new and unforeseen capital expenditures in a budget? Suddenly it would just throw that thing into disarray. It would strike me. And I'm sure there's a way around that. I just can't wrap my head around it. And I guess my last and simple question, is this stuff so new, or are there any municipal comparators that we have relative to small municipalities, or is software and so on such a new concept that everyone's sort of where we are learning it and so on? Sorry for the vagary of my questions. It's such a broad topic, and I really do respect it. Just that if you could help me out with the budgeting, reserves. And my last note would be when I stepped on council, it was $64 million was our asset base. You just mentioned it's climbed in 2 years to 105 million replacement cost. How does this type of project, how does it foresee 10 years, the real cost of replacement? Is it a standard 2% of inflation? Because I don't believe that to be true, at least when it comes to municipal services. So how do you project that 25, or does it bother doing cost analysis in that respect? Or is it just that thing needs to be fixed or dealt with? Sorry, that's a mouthful. Sorry, I can't be more specific. Thanks.
Go ahead.
Through your worship. So the 64 million compared with the 105 million or so that I quoted tonight, again, to kind of do that proper justice, I would need to go back and understand better how they come up with the 64 million when they did that asset management plan. If they only looked at core assets, didn't include necessarily fire or recreation. And I apologize because I don't know that off the top of my head. I honestly haven't spent a lot of time on the 14 asset management plans.
It may have been underestimated back then.
Right.
Fair.
And in terms of budgeting, so because this is still going to be quite new, and I think there's a lot of work we still need to do with the data, but even for this year's budget process, like the capital budget templates I've sent to senior management, I actually can pull out of the system and say, based on useful life, because we really don't have much other data in there right now, these are the assets in your department that are coming due for replacement this year. We have a backlog that, according to the system, according to the useful lives, which I'm not saying that that's the end all be all of information, because it's just, a generic number we guessed for estimated for that class of assets. So now it's really up to senior management to look at that list and say, well, I don't think that really needs to be replaced for another 5 years, or it needs to replace badly, or whatever that looks like. For this year, it's a preliminary start instead of honestly, I'm not sure how we came up with it last year, but hopefully it's actually a list of all of our assets, and it's an actual estimate based just strictly on useful life this year of where it slots in this year. And I'm hoping to bring forward a multi-year capital, not that we get approval for multi-year capital budget, but that you might see the next 3 to 5 years of what the projects look like. So that instead of just having that 1 year snapshot, because I can pull it for the next 50 years out of the software. Again, it's just the further out, the less accurate it could be. So the budget really will hopefully start to become more based on actual data and numbers. And that's where hopefully there's more transparency and in terms of how the replacement dates and the values are calculated. That will get more sophisticated the more we use it. So basically right now, yes, it's using a CPI. The software actually links to a CPI table, I think like a StatsCan CPI table, and that's how it calculates. So if we had an asset we bought at a historical cost, 10 years ago, it's just taking that CPI. Now, as we upload more information, like we have like the roads need study, or I know we have some bridge inspection reports that we did a few years ago. Like I now can take the replacement values that were estimated by the consultant and go in and actually replace and update that data so that it's a more accurate replacement value. Once we have a director of operations, we can start looking at the cost per kilometer for road resurfacing based on actual work that's being done, either in our municipality or like surrounding municipalities, right? We could come up with some industry standards, look at costing on work we've done in the last couple of years. How much does it actually cost per kilometer? Maybe that's more accurate than saying we're just going to take CPI from historical cost and projected it. So we will get better with the costing and the replacement values over time. But it's always going to be an estimate that senior management will have to, verify and adjust as needed when we bring it forward. It will not, obviously, it will not really identify growth assets. It won't identify if we have not picked up the asset at all. I won't be surprised. It's happened to me before. There will be assets in the township that aren't in aren't in our inventory. I've had assets in the inventory that we didn't actually own before, and we've had to go back and fix that. It will evolve over time for sure. And this isn't new software to the extent that we're not reinventing the wheel. In fact, I talk to other small municipalities and try to gather information from them and how they tackle certain things. And definitely we aren't alone at all in using the software and implementing this type of stuff.
And just, sorry.
Sorry, one more question.
Go ahead.
The reserves.
Yeah.
Sorry, the reserves, this does not, so there's actually another module that looks at capital funding and reserve funds and kind of helps with the financial planning. I don't understand the module that well yet. I haven't looked at it that much, but you're right. When it comes to the funding side of the budget, that will be me. I will do modeling. I'll have to build things in spreadsheets and I'll have to come forward and show you and explain how I've come up with my assumptions and let you provide the direction on how you want to proceed.
Thank you very much.
So I am going to recognize Councillor Maybe and then Councillor Wilkie, but just to tag on it, the one thing that I got from your comment is that it doesn't preclude us from using common sense. So even though the data's in there and it's telling us that such and such assets should be replaced in 2022, but we get to 2022 or 2021 and we look at the asset and go, that still has 5 years life. Well, there's a way, we're not just locked into making arbitrary decisions, which is good. So, Councillor Maybe and then Councillor Wilkie.
Thank you, Worship, through you. Just to go back to Deputy Mayor's question, is that I happen to work for Broadband, Ontario indirectly with Infrastructure Ontario. And all of what we're talking about is something that they've implemented for years. And when we're looking at citywide, we use SI with CDI and everything, and work orders and tracking barcodes to actually track individual equipment if you want. So we know when it's in service, who serviced it, the roads, GPS, it's a full run. But the information that this program will actually end up giving us is more than we can fathom right now. There's no question in my mind with how much the system that we use, what they pull out of it, as in the asset management team, the project management team, and the management team themselves on how they actually develop and move our work through. And when you look at all the provincial buildings that are throughout this province, we are looking after them. It is a staggering amount of assets that we are actually looking after. And it comes right down to the very basic needs of each building. So this program, I do see it being very helpful. And I see the chief's kind of over there. He's not paying attention. Even his trucks will know exactly where they are, when they go, and what they need. So it's all good to have this, and who's actually doing the work, and even the customer, the resident who calls in and says, okay, I got a pothole in front of my house, which is 792 What's Road, and he'll put that in, and the GPS will actually tell him, give him the direction to it, and then as you log that as a complete, and whether it's a priority or an emergency case, because my phone was just going off, you heard it, and that was a work order actually for something else, one of the buildings I work on. So it's that diligent that it will give you that information instantaneously, as well as when you complete it or put any notes in, it sends it back to the actual customer. So they know it's been dealt with. So they can go in and say, yes, they filled that whole pothole in, case closed. But there's many other things that it will do. So I'm all for it, and I think it's a great program and long overdue. And move forward. Thank you.
Councillor Wilkie.
Caveat. To agree with everything Councilor Maybe said, that when they double, the system can be data entries. It's critical. To a certain extent can be automated, but if it's not automated, it has to be disciplined and consistent and thorough. That could be challenging.
Well, the good news is we definitely have a type A personality who's inputting the data right now, so I'm fairly confident that she's doing all the research ahead of time to make sure that the data that she is putting in is very correct. But your point is well taken, garbage in, garbage out. And I believe that was a comment that was made by Councilor Ralph at the previous meeting. And I know that Kate is working very diligently to make sure that at least the initial set of data is very workable. But just my own comments, unless anybody else has any further comments before we close this. Go ahead. Oh,
Through your worship, just on page, the following couple pages, there's some information about some training, and there's actually a program we participated in that, that provides some online training for council. So we will probably send that email out and you can look into that link and hopefully that training will be helpful. Definitely be interested if you have any questions or anything coming into that training. It does include training for staff, a little bit of information on that. And then it's interesting, I just got an email this week on AMP It Up 2. So that was, the AMP It Up was what did provided the funding to write that other asset management strategic document that we just talked about briefly. Anyway, this is another program where they're going to provide free consulting to help identify basically what we need to be doing. So I'm looking into that a little bit further as well.
Excellent, thank you. Just a couple of comments of my own in regards to asset management. One of the things that strikes me when I was reviewing the slide deck, you know, as it was already indicated, we went from 64 million in 2014 up to 105. That could be obviously the cost of the actual assets, but also the fact that we were missing some data or we had some incorrect data. And I think that asset number is just going to continue to grow as we add more and more. But one of the things I just want to clarify on the page 9 of 22, when it said that the recommended financing strategy moving forward must take into account 4 issues, was this from the 2014 plan or was this your addition to it?
Page 9 is right from
the 2014. So the interesting piece to me is the need to diversify funding sources and reduce reliance on single funds. And that was back in 2014. And so going into this budget cycle, not having that additional 1.4 or 1.5 million that would go into our capital asset funding is definitely going to be sort of missed. And you know, unfortunately, we're going to have to figure out where we're going to get that from and how we're going to continue to deliver services to our residents on a regular basis and continue to maintain service levels. So I am interested in this next budgeting cycle just because I know that the staff has been working very hard at trying to find those efficiencies. The other question that I did have was in regards to page 15. As far as the documents that we have, the corporate objective, asset management policy, asset management plan, the 3 that we are missing, asset management strategy, objectives, and operational plans and strategies. Is this something you're hoping that the new position, the deputy treasurer, is going to be quarterbacking, or are you doing it in conjunction with them?
Through your issue, so well, it depends kind of on the deputy treasurer and what the skills and experience and what they bring to the table. Because I have somewhat of a attachment to the asset stuff, and I don't want it to go backwards. So if I get a deputy in that isn't specifically really knowledgeable in asset management, maybe they help with other things, and then I can spend more time on asset management. But a lot of these, so the strategic policy that that you approved already, it's pretty high level, right? We have work plans and budgets that we do, which are kind of down here. Some of these documents is trying to basically fill in the gaps. So how do we take what we're saying at a strategic level and how does that convert into what we actually should be doing at this level and making sure they do align. So those are documents we hopefully will be working on over the next year. And you know, hopefully we have some help with the treasurer in that role.
Excellent. Well, I look forward to the training that you've offered or that you've recommended, and hopefully that will just solidify even more that we're heading down the right path. I appreciate your effort. Any further questions or concerns? Seeing none, I guess we'll move on from the training session. Unless there's any other staff members, CAO, is there anything you want to say to go ahead of that? Okay. And the next on the agenda is the bylaws. Okay. Instead of ahead of myself. So the motion on the floor is moved by Councillor Olkey and seconded by Councillor Garrell that 3 readings and final passage be granted to bylaw number 20-057 and being a bylaw to amend zoning bylaw number 07-079 to rezone lands from rural to shoreline residential special exception -53 RS 53. Any questions or queries or concerns in regards to this bylaw? Deputy Mayor.
Thank you, Your Worship, and through you. Just in some of these planning reports, and it was a concern of mine on the committee of adjustment is the maps that were provided don't really give us much information as far as where it is, you know, what it's related to as far as, you know, is it a mile north of Highway 15? Is it, you know, 300 meters from the nest egg? You know, it's very vague mapping, which doesn't give us an idea of what we're looking at.
So your request would be in future, ask for a more detailed map in a context from a larger area?
Yes.
I think that's a very doable request. And Madam Planner will take that back to her department and make that request on your behalf. Yeah, Councillor Maybe, sorry.
Thank you, Worship, through you, just to enforce Deputy Mayor's comment. We have something coming up at our next meeting which has a map that's very hard to read also. You gotta get your finding glasses to actually go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and whatever. So I do feel that mapping is an important thing if we are going to try to make decisions on things to have it clear. Thank you.
Fair enough. Any further questions or concerns in regards to this bylaw in front of us? Seeing none, I will call the question. All those in favor, please signify. All those opposed? That is carried. Next motion on the floor is moved by Councillor Oki and seconded by Councillor Burrell that the special meeting adjourn. All those in favor, please signify. All those opposed, and it carries. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. Have a great evening.
You as well.
We didn't do one, we should have. What's that? What should we have done?